If a video game franchise runs for long enough, screw-ups are inevitable. It takes a special kind of circumstance, be that bad luck, greed, idiocy, ignorance, or anything else, to do the same thing wrong on a second occasion. That being said, then, I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 mistakes video game franchises made twice. Number 10. Chasing live service, Destiny 1 and 2. Live service has always been a siren song in the games industry, a gamble that never really paid out more than what it demanded. There's only one franchise that really made live service work for them, and even then it introduced tension into the devs team's lives and diminishing cultural returns. Of course, that franchise is Destiny. And even though it technically worked out for them from a financial standpoint, it still took 2 tries to make it work, as the first Destiny was a resounding flop compared to what Bungie was hoping for. The live service model proved one of the most hindering elements with the first Destiny, as it played a part in leading Bungie to scrapping most of the storyline right before the game was even released. When they managed to strike a better balance in Destiny 2, it seemed to work out for all involved for a while. But Destiny 2's live service model has also led to Bungie screwing around with what they built with constant updates, so even the good stuff that is there hangs constantly on a precarious perch. And even if it were at an all-time high, Destiny 2's cultural footprint rests in constantly shifting sand. Simply because players will eventually get bored of Destiny 2 and go to other games, there's not much you can do to stop that. The live service model demands that a game never truly be over, and thus Destiny 1 and 2 run the risk of fading from memory as quickly as they entered. Number 9. Changing the gameplay, Darksiders 2 and 3. Fundamentally altering your gameplay style is a risky gambit for a game franchise, but to be fair, it has worked in the past. But if you do it too many times, you run the risk of diluting your game's identity in the eyes of the public. And this is a trap that the Darksiders franchise fell into face first, got back up, and then just kind of belly flopped down into it again. Good job. The first game is a solidly built God of War clone featuring lots of hacking and slashing and puzzle solving and platforming. The second one is more of an RPG with some Borderlands style looter elements. And finally, the third game is of course a Souls-like with all the trimmings of that genre. None of these games are particularly bad, but they lack overall a solid identity. Yeah, sure, you're still hacking and slashing, but the games built around that core idea vary wildly from entry to entry. This makes it hard for people to really latch on to Darksiders. I mean, if you put a Mario game into your console, you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get, but you put a Darksiders game in and who knows what's going to pop up. This, among with some other real-world factors, is why keeping this series alive has been an uphill battle for THQ. Number 8's bloating the gameplay, Batman Arkham City and Batman Arkham Knight. Arguably the biggest problem with the Arkham games was how they just kept adding more onto what was already there. And the problem with that is that the original Arkham Asylum is about as close to perfect as a superhero game can get, perfectly embodying everything that makes Batman awesome while also being one of the most satisfying stealth games ever made. Arkham City would then expand on the formula of Asylum about as far as one could reasonably go without breaking the whole thing. While the combat, stealth and world were made bigger and deeper than ever before, what made the original a great experience was still maintained. Although missions like the Riddler trophy showed the fraying edges of this stretched fabric, a perfectly doable side mission made nightmarishly long. And of course, all of this got much worse with Arkham Knight. While taken by itself, Knight is perfectly fine. It's an abject demonstration of sequel bloat. Now, everything from combat to stealth to traversal is packed to bursting with all sorts of bells and whistles, far past the point of being necessary. And missions like the Riddler trophies at this point are nothing less than exercises in masochism. Number 7, overly long intros, Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2. Let us know down in the comments below video games that you can think of with really long introductions. The Fallout games come to mind. They do drag on, of course, but the torchbearer for endlessly opening acts are the Kingdom Hearts games. It takes about 30 minutes to get into Fallout 3 or 4. Kingdom Hearts kind of eclipses these. The first entry in Square Enix's Disney crossover takes about an hour before you're finally let loose onto the game. Heck, it takes 30 minutes before you even see the title card. While both games' intros serve to imbue the player with a sense of place, helping them to understand exactly who protagonists Sora and Roxas are and what they care about and why before it's ripped away from them, you could have cut that time in half and still had the same effect. Especially because the intro for Kingdom Hearts 2 can run some players upwards of 2 to 3 hours. That is absurd. Fortunately, this is one problem that Kingdom Hearts 3 managed to solve, starting with a bang and then keeping that energy up for the rest of the game. Thankfully, yes, not another long intro, otherwise we could have been sat there for about 5 hours. Number 6, Imbalanced RNG, Dragon Ball Xenoverse 1 and 2. RNGesus can be a cruel and angry god, and few games are better examples of his wrath than the Dragon Ball Xenoverse titles. There's a lot wrong with the two games, including some truly awful localization, but the top of the list is how deeply imbalanced the RNG is. The second game is a little bit better, but the first Xenoverse is downright unfair with how random it can be at times. Nowhere is the RNG more unforgiving than in the reward system. In most games, completing the objective gets you the reward as advertised, no ifs, ands or buts. Even in the majority of MMORPGs, you at least get the chance to get them in a lotto system where they can potentially go to a different player. But Xenoverse 1 and 2 make it a crapshoot if you'll even get it at all. And considering how arduous some of the late game bosses can get, receiving nothing for your troubles can imbue a truly rare kind of anger within players. There's so much to love about the Xenoverse series, but its dedication to leaving everything up to random number generators has been an albatross around both games' necks. Number 5, releasing against way more popular games, Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West. When you release a game can be just as make or break as the quality of the game that you're releasing. It doesn't matter how good it is, if you're releasing a game against something that everyone is going to be talking about, then expect your title to die on the vine. This is a curse that has followed the Horizon games since the beginning. Both Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon Forbidden West have done well enough for themselves to have gas in the tank for a third title, but both games flew under the larger gaming public's radar because they both released against highly anticipated games that inevitably sucked up all of the oxygen. Horizon Zero Dawn was released just days before Breath of the Wild and inevitably met comparison, while the second hit shelves just a week before the coming of Elden Ring, in which nothing survived. The Horizon series has had to fight tooth and nail for every inch with every release, and while it's managed to hang in there, this is a streak that must be broken with the next entry. Although knowing this franchise's luck, Horizon 3 will end up releasing against, I don't know, Grand Theft Auto 6, a Pokemon MMO, let's just say Half-Life 3. Number 4, interfering with development and rushing to release Ultima 8 and 9. The once legendary Ultima series died a cruel EA-inflicted death with the 1-2 punch of Ultimas 8 and 9. The series was the grandfather of Western RPGs, considered one of the founding members of the genre, and for 7 games Ultima would innovate on the formula it established and entertain hardcore gamers across the 1980s and 1990s. But then Electronic Arts happened, insert boo here. Developers' Origin Systems' hatred of EA is well documented. Some fans even interpret the story of Ultima 7 as a satire of EA as a company. But when EA bought Origin in 1992, they proceeded to prove all of their fears correct. The Ultima series was interfered with at every conceivable turn, with meddling executive mandates mixed with brutal release deadlines. This conga line of bad decisions resulted in the abysmal Ultima 8 and then Ultima 9, criticised for a slew of decisions that clearly came from higher up than the development team on the ground. These two silver bullets were what finally put down one of the original great RPG series and shuttered one of the most creative video game studios of its day. Number 3, the bad vehicle sections, Mass Effect and Mass Effect Andromeda. The most infamous parts of the original Mass Effect were far and away the Mako segments. Even in the tweaked Legendary Edition, the thing just doesn't handle well at all. It's unwieldy, it's stiff, and yet somehow floaty at the same time. None of the missions requiring it are interesting enough to justify the need to actively drive it to the mission locations. The Mako is known among BioWare fans for being a failed experiment all around, one that was best left in the first game and not revisited, so why did they do it again? Yes, in the much maligned spin-off Mass Effect Andromeda, they brought back the vehicle sections with the Nomad. The Nomad sections are by no means the worst part of Andromeda because, just look at it, but that doesn't mean it's the best part either. It was just an ill-conceived idea from the start to bring vehicle sections back into Mass Effect after all the effort done to remove them. Mostly because for a game about exploring brand new worlds, adding in this big hulking vehicle sure does flatten out those worlds and make them far less interesting as a result. Number 2, having to play the game twice, Ghosts and Goblins and Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Ghosts and Goblins was one of Capcom's premier games for the NES, already a beloved arcade classic. This console equivalent was a charming port of the original. It was also soul-crushingly hard. This game was one of the poster children for the phrase NES hard, with difficult enemies, stiff controls, and one of the most scream-inducing late-game twists in gaming history. First of all, unless you finish stage 5 of 6 with the shield weapon you have to redo the previous mission all over again, as if you were just meant to know that. And the shield weapon isn't great, but it is 100% doable, so you go back, you do it again, and then you're told after defeating the final boss that you have to replay the entire game anyway to get the actual ending. One can only imagine the reactions of first-time players back in the 80s, one of the most frustrating games ever made, and they asked you to play it all again just to beat it. And that was Ghosts and Goblins legacy for years, until the Super Nintendo came along, bringing a superior sequel with it, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. While Super Ghouls and Ghosts has the same difficulty as its predecessor without any of the stiff controls or BS enemy encounters, it did carry over one detail from the original. Yes, when you've beaten the game, you're told you actually have to go back and do it all over again. You could say that it paved the way for New Game Plus, but I also think it's bad. It's bad. Number 1, ending on a cliffhanger, Shenmue 2 and 3. Words cannot describe the feeling that washed over that E3 audience when Shenmue 3's Kickstarter was announced. Within 2 hours, the crowdfunding project was filled out by fans desperate to finally have an ending to the story of Ryo Hayazuki and Lan Di. Shenmue 2 had ended on a cliffhanger in 2001, so seeing that finally be resolved was too tantalizing for fans to hang on to their hard-earned dollars. And boy oh boy was that trust ever punished. In the ultimate act of utter arrogance and delusion, creator Yu Suzuki proceeded to end Shenmue 3, an already abysmally primitive game in its own right, on an unsatisfying cliffhanger, promising to continue the story in Shenmue 4. The assumption that there would even be a fourth try after the miracle of existence that was Shenmue 3 says a lot about Suzuki, and none of it is good. Again, because Shenmue 3 wasn't even that good in its own right. Shenmue 2 and 3's cliffhanger endings aren't just a flaw shared by 2 entries in a game series, but a flaw that most likely killed Shenmue as a franchise. I mean, at this point, who's really clamouring for a Shenmue 4? Exactly.